Jon Hoadley is here, representative from Kalamazoo, talking about that which we've spent a lot of time talking about, the issue of gun violence. Now, in your position in the Free Press, you talked about some resolutions that are out there that address some of these issues.
Absolutely. So there's a package of legislation that would look to make sure that guns aren't involved in domestic violence situations, that we close any remaining loopholes and make sure folks get background checks, and that we also return local control so places that are intended to be gun-free can actually be gun-free. I also offered a set of 3 other solutions that have not been dropped as legislation yet, but looking at ways that we can use some financial reforms to make sure that we're holding folks who would be negligent gun owners responsible, that we can create a better alert system, and ultimately finding ways that we can use smarter technology on guns to prevent negligent or accidental shootings. But the conversation I've been having with folks overall is that we need to see a cultural shift. One thing that I agree with, even when I disagree with policy pieces from some folks, we all agree we want to keep our family safe, we want to keep your kids safe, we want to keep yourself safe. And the question is, how do we do that? And what we're seeing is that the current data shows it's not, our policies right now aren't working. And the best example of this, though, I think is we need sort of the drunk driving approach that we saw back in the 1980s, right? And as we changed in the 90s, we changed the laws that said when you violate these laws, we're going to hold you accountable. We had folks that made sure that we said it was no longer culturally acceptable to, be out there, drinking and driving, and then looking for also finding other systemic ways to change, making sure bartenders and bar owners had some responsibility in this too, right? There's never one solution. And I think, again, regardless of where you stand, I think everybody wants to keep their family safe. So how do we create some reasonable pieces where most Michiganders and Americans agree?
How do we do that? Any ideas?
I think the biggest piece is that we need to be able to have an adult conversation on this. I think that if you are a believer and then says that we have a right to own firearms, and that's what the Second Amendment says under this court, we have to then say, great, well, then what are the things that we all can agree on? Most people say you should get a background check. So let's just make sure there's no way for folks not to. A lot of folks are saying let's invest in mental health, and I agree that we should be doing more of that, which is why the current proposal in the budget that would privatize and potentially reduce services in Michigan is something that we should have bipartisan opposition to. If you agree that we should have more mental health services, let's not cut their budget right now. Let's expand it so we can be getting ahead of these problems. But ultimately, I get it. It's a really passionate issue, and people from all sides need to be able to listen. I'm sure there are things that I've gotten wrong, and I look forward to hearing from folks, and they tell me, and I keep doing my research. But let's have a good back and forth and making sure that we all agree at the end we want our community safe.
Are people ready to have that common sense conversation? Are you feeling that, or is the political conversation intervening in this?
People are. Politicians, I don't know. It's sort of funny because when I talk to folks, I talk to gun owners, I talk to people who've never touched a gun in their life, I talk to people all over, and they're saying there are certain things that they agree on. And what they don't like is when irresponsible gun owners beseech the good name of a gun owner, right? So I think that there is some bipartisan, really just general consensus. Let's take care of some of these things that we all agree on. And, and there's going to be some proposals that we disagree on and we shouldn't touch them. But the fact is the political process has made it so these types of conversations have zero traction in Lansing. And that's doing a disservice to, I think, where most people in Michigan are. And polling would agree.
Representative Jon Hoadley's here, and we'll talk in a minute about some of the ideas here that we've talked about, and the notion that some people will say, yeah, but a bad guy's going to get a gun no matter what. We'll talk about that coming up in just a minute on WBCK. Snowy Tuesday, we're here with Representative Jon Hoadley of Kalamazoo talking about what to do about gun violence. Now, you talked about some of those common sense ideas, that there's a little traction, at least on some of them right now in Lansing, and it focuses on some of the, I guess, what some folks would call no-brainer things, background checks and so on, and domestic violence situations and things of that nature. Somebody is listening saying, yeah, but a bad guy who wants a gun is going to get it, no matter what we do. What's your thought on that?
Well, we don't need to make it easy for that person to get a gun.
How about that?
You know,
right.
we actually have, unfortunately, some of the largest straw purchasing gun shops just outside of Michigan. So, you know, in the region, there are folks, if they want to get a gun because of the hodgepodge system that we have currently, there are folks that can get those guns. Now, other countries have taken different approaches that have made it more difficult to or more expensive to do that sort of workarounds. And you know, the reality is that it reduces access to gun violence. But here's the end of the deal, right? We have folks that want to keep guns for hunting, and we have folks that want to keep guns for self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my partner does that. I'm not going to dispute any of that. But we do have some questions about, you know, where is it appropriate to have those guns? And, you know, what is the obligation, right? With those rights come responsibilities. And that's
Right.
true of every right in the U.S. Constitution. The Second Amendment is no different. And so why we should make sure that we are then putting in policies in place that show when folks aren't being responsible. Or if they're not prepared to take that right responsibly, then they don't get to enjoy they have some restrictions. We see that with the First Amendment. There's, you know, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's
Right.
the best example.
Right.
You know, there's responsibilities about voting, even though that's one of our rights as well.
Mm-hmm.
So with this case, if folks are negligent with their guns and they're leaving their guns out or they don't report when a gun is stolen, shouldn't there be some responsibility on those gun owners? The fact is that, you know, when we see the number of accidental shootings, what is or even just accidentally leaving guns accessible to folks? And when we hear these, you know, and I think about these examples of where we're talking about allowing more guns into schools, you know, with more guns become more opportunities for accidents to happen. And, you know, I'd hate to see this, you know, sort of the negligence that could happen. And again, not with all gun owners, because some do a really good job.
Mm-hmm.
They're trained. They've done their background. They keep their guns up to date. But the reality is that there are folks, there are bad actors out there too.
I get your point. We need to do what we can within our ability to cross our T's, as they say. But you know, you look at this Dalton situation, and allegedly he's the guy, right? Okay. So you look at his behavior in this, and you say, this is a guy, at least this is what I said, this is a guy who knew he would get caught and wasn't concerned with that. He had an agenda. If he didn't want to get caught, he would have hit the highway for some distant location after he did what he did. He didn't do that. He stayed in town. The car was well described. He was caught. So you have a contingent of people out there who aren't concerned with the consequences. They have an agenda they want to achieve, and they're going to do it, and maybe they're going to get caught, but their agenda is done. Is that fair to say, then, that we're not going to eliminate this problem on that basis?
I don't think we're ever going to eliminate all violence, right? Just like we have safer cars now, there are fewer people dying in car crashes than they have historically.
Mm-hmm.
But people still do, and it's tragic. But we didn't say we shouldn't do anything about trying to make safer cars. Because the technology wasn't available at the time, or because we know there will still be accidents. And that's the case with guns, too. There's a lot of proposals out there that would allow for smart gun technology, which could help prevent negligent firing of firearms, or if your firearm was stolen, then they wouldn't be able to use it to commit a crime. So there's things that we can do. And what I'm just saying is that while we recognize there's many places where we can't do something, shouldn't we all be able to come together and look at some places where we can? Let's do that.
And so have you said that to your colleagues, and what's the response been?
We've been having these conversations for months now, and there is a very, I think, an ideological divide that says, that sometimes says because there are bad things that will happen, we shouldn't have any restrictions. And there's other folks that say because bad things are happening, the solution is more guns and more access to guns. And again, I think that's coming from this place that says people want to keep their friends and family and themselves safe.
Yeah, right. That's common ground.
But absolutely. It's just the solution to get there. I don't think the data backs that up. And it's not just me. It's a whole bunch of academic researchers and folks that have done comparative studies on this as well. Doesn't mean that that's true in every case. But, you know, it's sort of one of those situations where we have to say more guns in more places may not be the best solution for all incidents of dealing with gun violence. In particular, things when you look at domestic violence situations, those are the most poignant, where more guns is actually significantly more problematic.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that I think we need to have that conversation on. And I would love if folks, in particular, if you're a gun owner, if you haven't had a conversation with your representative, put a call into our offices and just say, hey, I'm not going to agree with everything, Representative Hoadley or some of those other Democrats, whatever you want to say, or whatever they're proposing.
Mm-hmm.
But there are certain things that I do agree on, right? And I've yet to find a gun owner that doesn't think that folks should have to know how to use the tools, those guns that they've purchased. I've yet to find one.
Well, and the colleagues of yours with whom we've spoken, Dr. Bison was here just recently. So was Representative Maturin. Senator Knopf was here. All of them said we need to get more information about all of this. So what you're suggesting, talk to your representatives, seems like they're open to that, and they're ready to hear what you have to say about it.
I think that's absolutely true, and you don't have to be a policy expert to do this. I think a lot of times for us, it's having just those brief conversations. You call us or you email us, and you say, hey, here's just some of my thoughts, right? And then we can run with that. And, then we're applying that into the fact that there's multiple pieces of legislation that would allow more guns or fewer guns or more background checks or fewer background checks. Literally, those are all pieces of legislation that are sitting on the calendar right now in the legislature. So just being able to have a short conversation with us or with a staffer lets us then say, okay, here's what folks in our communities are saying. So how do we then apply that when we're looking at all of this legislation? And then lets us go talk to some of the committee chairs and say, can we have a hearing on these couple of bills, or can we maybe take up for a vote some of these bills? But we need to hear from you.
All right, and you're easily found, as are all representatives and senators really in Michigan. Just type their name into a search engine and the details come up. If you're looking for Jon, it's Hoadley. Should be easy to find. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate folks that are having this conversation because it's so important.
Representative Jon Hoadley of Kalamazoo.